Last video we left off creating our loading screen. In this video we're going to create our reusable empty state view that we can show on a screen that is empty, right? So for example, as you see here in the design, when the user has no followers, we want to show this, decent looking screen to let the user know like, hey, the network call didn't go wrong. This user just has no followers. And then we're going to do the same thing later on in the course when we go to our favorites tab and the user hasn't set a favorite yet. We're going to let them know like, hey, you haven't set a favorite yet, why don't you go do that kind of thing in the empty state. And empty states are important, again, because it conveys to the user like what's going on, right? Without an empty state, the user would just see a blank screen and they'd be like, what's happening? What is this? So how we're going to implement this is we're going to create a custom UI view, a GF empty state view, and we're going to pop up that view anytime we realize there's an empty state. For example, in our follower list VC, we'll do a check here in our followers, right? Because we get back a list of followers. If it's 0, it was still successful. We'll still get back an array of followers from our network call. However, it'll be 0. So we'll do a check to see if the follower count equals 0. And if that is the case, we'll pop up the empty state view. So that's the plan. Let's get started. So the first thing we want to do is create our UI view. So in custom views, open that up. Now let's actually do this now. Remember I said we're going to do this as we go. So new group, call it views, new group, call it buttons, new group, text field. And like I said, this will organize it as we go here. So text fields, and then I believe we have one for image views and view controllers. So new group, image views, new group, view controllers. And again, this is project organization. If you disagree with how I'm organizing, perfectly fine. It's subjective. Organize your project however you like and how you think is going to be easier for other developers to navigate and find stuff in your project. So like I said, normally these custom views here have in a typical large project, there'll be a bunch of them. You'll see like we only have we have one text field. Oh, labels. I forgot labels. New group, labels. So these two go in labels. Anyway, like I was saying and this is an image view. Where's those at? Like I said, you'll create a lot of custom views in projects. So, these folders will be more full. For example, we're going to have like 3 or 4 views in ours. But for right now, this is our first custom view. So UI view. So new file, CocoaTouch class, hit next, subclass of UI view. And again, this is going to be called our GF empty state view. Hit return, create it. And here we are. Let me pop up the design back on the screen. So as you can see, we have a message label, and then we have this image, which is of the GitHub logo that we're kind of it's there for decoration, just to be honest. And we have it kind of like off and to the right. So if you remember in our assets folder here, so go into support, assets, this empty state logo is the full logo, pretty big. So we're actually going to like constrain the image view kind of down in the lower right corner, so only part of it shows. It's just a stylistic choice. So back to our empty state view, do our initializers, typical, right? So init, frame, super init with frame, pass in the frame, and we're going to get our storyboard error here, all right? Cool, we got that. And then we're going to create our configure method. So private func configure. And how do we want to configure this whole GF empty state view? Well, the two things we're going to need, right? We're going to need that message label, and then we're going to need the UI image view that holds the logo. So our message label is going to be a GF title label. Because this empty state, we want it big and bold. We're probably going to change the font color because I think that's going to be too bold. But we definitely want that big, bold style of our GF title label. So let message label equal GF title label, initialize it with text alignment.center and font size of 28. Again, that's just what I have dialed in. And then let logo image view equal UI. It's just a regular UI image view because we're not doing anything with it. UI image view, initialize that. And in our configure method, we're going to add sub view. We want to add the message label, and we also want to add the logo image view. Now remember, like I said, add subview, logo, image view. Now remember, like I said, you could break this down into each item if you like. I'm going to start doing, on these simple ones where there's only 2, I'm just going to start doing that in the same configure method. So the first thing we want to do with our message label is we want to set the lines of code because you see in the design, we don't want to have, like, it's not going to be 10 lines, right? But it's not going to be 1 line. And in our GF title label, we never specified how many lines, not lines of code, I said that, how many lines like the label is. So if we do message label dot number of lines, we're going to make that equal 3. And then, like I said, we're going to change the color. So message label dot text color is going to equal dot secondary label. Again, to give it that like lighter feel to it. We don't want it to be like we don't want it to be black on a light screen and then just white bold. We want it to be a little bit faded. So now, of course, right on our GF title label, you know, you could put this in the initializer. So you're passing in a color, you're passing in a number of lines. Like that is an option. Again, there's so many ways to do things. You could do that. My personal preference is I tend to not like to have an initializer with a bunch of like 5 or 6 parameters. Now you could create some convenience initializers to, you know, make some default values. There's again, so many ways to do this. I chose to just configure it at the site when it's a little different than our typical GF title label. So again, like you should have to do this custom stuff like very rarely. And again, my point of view, I don't mind doing it as like a, you know, once in a while kind of thing, my opinion. So now that we have the message label configured, let's start configuring the UI image view. Logo image view.image. It's going to equal UI image. So we're going to create the initialize the image from a string, or named is the proper thing. And that is going to be the, and I always do this just to be safe, that is going to be the empty state logo. Double click on it, copy, go back to the GF empty state view, paste it. Again, when we optimize, we may put all these in constants so there's no strings running around, but we'll get there. So logo image view dot tamic, again, this crazy thing, equals false. So now that we have some everything configured here, we can go ahead and start doing our constraints. So ns layout constraint dot activate. Again, so now we're going to pass in the 4 constraints per item here. Get that cleaned up. So vertically, we want the message label to be centered, but a little bit up from the center. And the way to do that is to do message label dot center y. I had to think there. Center y dot constraint is equal to this with a constant. That's going to be equal to the view dot center. Sorry, self dot center y anchor. And then the constant is -150. And what this is doing is this is moving it up 150 points from the center, right? So it's going to be centered vertically and then just shift it up a little bit. So now let's do the leading and trailing. So message label dot leading anchor dot constraint equal to self dot leading anchor, and the constant there is 40. And this is a little bigger than usual because we want it to be more centered in the view. We don't want it to stretch all the way to the edges. You see in the design kind of the look we're going for. So message label dot trailing anchor dot constraint equal to self dot trailing anchor and -40 because of the trailing. And somebody in the comments brought up a good point that I had never actually encountered before. Another side note, the comments are becoming very, very valuable in this course, and the course isn't even fully out yet. So if you're going through these videos, but you're not reading through the comments, I highly recommend doing that. A lot of different ways are being brought up to do things. You know, just good discussions going on in the comments. Definitely check those out and be sure to contribute if you have other ways to do things. And then we want to set the height, message label dot height anchor dot constraint. That's going to be equal to constant, and that's 200. And I'm hard coding that because, right, we're passing in the message, right? This message is not dynamic. We know exactly what this label is going to say. It's only going to be 3 lines. So I know we can put a hard-coded height in there. It's not going to be dynamic. So that takes care of the message label. Let's start talking about the logo image view. Before we do that, pulling up the design, again, you can see, like you see in the assets again, what the empty state logo looks like, right? It's the big square GitHub logo. Well, if you look at the design here, again, it's pushed down into the lower right, and the image we had to make bigger to get the exact like location. So these constraints are going to look like no constraint we've done yet. And again, this took a lot of tweaking and finagling to get the look I wanted. So again, when I put in these numbers, know that this took me a good 5-10 minutes to sit there and change the numbers, tweak it, and dial it in. But this is what we ended up with. And I'll kind of explain how they work. So logo image view dot width anchor dot constraint is equal to, now this time we use multipliers. So we did self dot width, so the whole width of the view, and then we multiplied that by 1.3. So what this is saying is take our image and make the width of the image 1.3 times, so 30% larger than the actual width of the screen. And the reason we did that is to get the exact look we were going for, right? If we just kept it the same size, it didn't look like it did on the design. So we made it bigger, and again, we're gonna move it down into the lower corner. And again, this is a square image, kind of like I mentioned, oops, I forgot a comma up here. Like I mentioned, if you have the luxury of creating your assets or having close contact with your designer that's creating the assets, anytime you can make the assets square, it makes them so much easier to deal with, at least in my experience. Height anchor, and I'm not saying like the design square, but right, you can make it a PNG that is a transparent background, and the transparent background can be in a square, so you can deal with that. Anyway, just a little tip there that I've found. So again, same thing, equal to self dot width anchor and 1.3. Again, we're doing this because we want the height and the width to be the same. We want them to be a square. Now logo image view dot trailing anchor. So this is going to be on the right side of the screen. And oh, I forgot to mention, I was going to say something before I went on my little comment rant. The comment that was interesting was somebody brought up like, hey, is this going to work in a right to left language? And I had never localized an app into a right or left language, right to left language. So I wasn't sure. And it turns out as long as you use leading and trailing anchor instead of left anchor and right anchor, it will work when the UI gets flipped and is read right to left in like Arabic, for example. So that is why it's a good thing to use leading and trailing rather than right to left. And again, you read the comments, you'll pick up on that. So anyway, I forgot to mention that. So remember, now we're doing trailing anchor, and this is where it gets different. So constraint is going to be equal to this with a constant. So self dot trailing anchor. Now remember, we usually do a negative number for trailing. However, and that is to give us the padding on the left. However, we're pushing this image to the right. Again, look at the design. You can see that like half the image is like cut off. So we're pushing it over to the right. And again, this took dialing in, but I found 200 was the number that worked there. And then same thing with the bottom. So logo image view dot bottom anchor dot constraint equal to self dot bottom anchor. And again, normally when you deal with the bottom, you got to do negative to bring it up. However, we want to push it down. Again, looking at the design, you can see it's kind of sunk down. So now we do 140, and this should give us the look we want here. So now we call configure in our init here, configure, and this will give us our label, or at least the layout of it. Now, one thing we want to do though, right? We have this message label. We don't have a message. Like, what text is it going to show? So we want to create an initializer to pass in a message. So just like we've done before, let's create an init that takes in a message, which is a string. And we have to call the super.init with frame.0, just like we've done before. And the concept of convenience initializers has been brought up a couple times. We're going to address that in a later video. If you remember last video, I said we're going to go through and do some optimizations and talk about that. That will be one of them because making these convenience initializers is a slight optimization on this implementation. So little sneak peek, we're going to be doing a video talking about convenience initializers later in the course. And then message label.text is going to equal message that we pass in right there. And then we call configure again. And real quick, what the convenience initializer allows us to do is, remember, we have to remember to call configure here and here. We don't have to worry about calling configure once. So slight optimization there, but we'll get into talking about those and what they are so you fully understand convenience initializers again in a later video. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now. So here we are. We have our GF empty state view. We're going to initialize it by passing in a string. Again, we're adding it to the sub view, doing a little bit of configuration, constraining it, and this should be all set up. So now let's talk about where we want to call it from. So we're going to do this in our UI view controller extension because we have multiple screens that want to use an empty state, right? Our favorites view and now this follower list screen. And if you remember from last time when we did the loading view, I talked about how in a future video we're going to create a data loading view controller that's a subclass of UI view controller, and we're going to move the loading views and the show empty state views out of there. But more on that later. So let's call func show empty state view, and we have to pass in some parameters here. We want to say with message, and that's a string, and we need to pass in view, UI view, and here's why. Because you'll see when we write this function, we need to know like what view we're putting in this in because we have to constrain it and add to sub view. So let empty state view equal GF empty state view that we're initializing, right? We get our custom initializer here with our message, And the message is going to be the message that we pass through here on line 56. And like I said, we need to do empty state view.frame equals view.bounds. And then we need to add it to the subview. So add, view, which is the view we passed in here, which you see when we call this, it's going to be the view on the view controller. View.add subview and empty state view. So again, this function, passing in the message that we want the empty state view to show. We need to pass in the view so we know where to constrain it and what view to add, add the subview to. And we went ahead and created our empty state view with the message. Set the frame to the view.bounds. We want this to fill the whole screen. It's going to take that up. And there we did. We added the empty state view to the view. So the last thing we have to do is actually call this whenever we want to show the empty state view. So in our follower list VC, here in our network call, let's talk about where we want to do this. So we know we want to check if the followers array is empty, but we got to be careful where we do it, right? Because if we just do it at the top here, what if the user has 400 followers exactly? So the next time they make the network call, the followers is empty, and then we don't want to show the empty state view for that. So we definitely got to make sure we've already tried to append everything into the followers list here. So we're going to do it right here. If self.followers is empty, and by the way, is empty is more efficient than checking for .count == 0. Little fun fact. So if self.followers is empty, we want to set our message. So let message equal, and then this is whatever we wanted to say. So this user doesn't have any followers. Go follow them. Smiley face. Command Control space for the emoji menu. So there's our message. So now we need to show our GF state view. So show GF empty state view. Now with the string, we want to pass in the message that we just created there. And I just created this variable here, so this didn't end up being a super long line of code. And then in the view is self.view. Now, where you're going to notice I have to do Command B. It's going to tell me to use self here because we're in the closure. And that should kind of ring alarms a little bit, right? We're on a background thread. Anytime we're updating or presenting UI, we have to go on the main queue here. So here we'll do dispatch queue.main.async to get on the main thread. And we'll throw this in. How does this look on the one line? Okay, it looks fine. I mean, I know how it looks in my sample code that I built because, again, my text is always so huge for these videos. So I didn't know how it would look. But anyway, we'll throw that on one line. So, and then we'll do a return because if we're showing the empty state view, we want to get out of here. We want nothing else to execute. We don't want to call update data if that happens. So again, we make our network call. We do the usual stuff where we append the followers. However, after we append the followers, we check if that followers array is empty, then we're going to show our empty state view and back out of the function. So let's test this. And I'm starting to smile. Well, hopefully it works first try. I'm starting to smile because I remember 2 days ago, I said, please don't follow this person. This is my empty state view tester. This is the moment which I intentionally didn't test this before. So I have no clue if anybody followed her because I thought it'd be funny if someone followed her and I'd start yelling at them. So Wendy-Aluna, who followed her? Who followed her? Nobody. Good for you. Good job, guys. Good for you. So Wendy-Aluna, this user doesn't have any followers. Go follow them. And you can see our logo doesn't look quite right. So admittedly, I had to cut away and figure out what was going on, but I'll explain it, for your education. So if you remember how in the UI view controller.extension here, right, I just set the frame equal to view.bounds. That's just going to fill up the whole view because we don't really care about the top and bottom. Everything's there. However, in my sample code, the project I built before, I pinned it to the safe area. So that changed the dimension a little bit. So we need to go back to our GF empty state view, change these numbers to 170 and 40. So just again, remember I said these numbers, you got to tweak them to dial it into what you want. So again, there is a difference between the safe area and the view. So that's what caused that little hiccup there in the logo being too far down and to the right. So Wendy-Aluna, there we go. Now we got the logo looking how we want it. So yes, so this user doesn't have any followers. Go follow them, smiley face, with the faint little logo in the bottom. And let's, for funsies, let's see what this looks like in dark mode. Again, we got your environment overrides. Flip it to dark, and then go back to your simulator. And now here's what the empty state looks like in dark mode using the different icon as well. So that is our empty state. As you can see, it's reusable, and we're going to reuse that for our favorites tab as well when somebody hasn't selected favorites. In the next video, we're going to start implementing our search controller so we can actually search through our collection view and get that sweet diffable data source animation going. So that's next. Let's move on.